Thank you. I'm going to read from Girl Beside Him, but I'm going to read from several sections throughout the first half of the book to give you an idea of how the whole book moves, or how part of the book moves. And so I'll give you a very brief introduction about what the book's about. It's about a man who is a very solitary person. He's a wildlife biologist, and he's solitary by choice because he's afraid that he's dangerous to women. And he's decided that he has to find out the truth about himself at last, so he has hired a female assistant for the first time, and he's done this to test himself. This is sort of parallel to the study he's doing with the animals. In the book, when this man is thinking to himself, it sounds as though he's talking to himself. The narrative changes tone, and it is addressed to the character, and you'll notice this right away. And the book does start in this fashion, so that's where I am starting at the very beginning. Girl Beside Him. Ski season continues, bunnies abound, bouquets of grinning balloons, white teeth and sun-black skin, pale raccoon masks tattooed by designer sunglasses, tired muscles vigorously content, or endorphins still surging in hot bodies that breathe fog on alpine mountains in late spring. Fun recent enough to sustain a kick in those departing for LA or Dallas and beyond. An adrenaline rush of anticipation fuels the grins on those boarding for Vail, Snow Summit, Aspen, Jackson Hole. They're nothing to you. You'll see none like them where you're going. But be careful. This time you're on your own. No one watching you but you. No one giving instructions and assignments to fill up every hour. Watch it. With a change like this, the cold clot may rupture. Questions get answered. Hypothesis proven. Are you a sex killer waiting to happen? You don't suffer from impaired memory. Hadn't Big Sister wanted to grow up to be a vet and go to Africa to work in a compound in an animal preserve like on her favorite show, Doctari? Took you to the zoo on a bus when you were 3 or 4. It must have been a howler monkey, like an air raid sounding off right beside you, just as you, always the rogue, bent to scare some newborn chicks in the bushes. You screamed and ran, but she caught you and held you, and you were like a monkey yourself, watching over her shoulder as she carried you through the zoo's streets, watching the zoo unroll backwards, rows of primates and birds in cages. At home, you played Doctari, and all the stuffed animals were in the veterinary compound in Africa, hurt or sick. You were one of the animals, too, and she gave you candy pills and bandaged one leg. Naturally, you decided to also be the hungry leopard or cheetah that came prowling at night, and Doctari would come back to save the compound, pinning and tickling the cheetah. Now, on your way for the first time to do field work alone. No other guys in a communal setting with a common time limit and single purpose. Do your part, and the whole project will wrap up. Social needs crunched to an hour of cards around a Coleman before zipping the mosquito net of your tent behind you. Or go as a group to a tavern for a beer and discuss the project, discuss tomorrow's tasks, discuss the findings, discuss the problems, discuss solutions. Your input as crucial as anyone else's, so you can't allow yourself to be sidetracked. You don't stray. Objectify your questions. Continue to observe and note behavior. Keep your own surroundings safe. And research similar animals. Know their patterns and MO. Know their warning signs, their mistakes. Study their past crimes and what's been learned about why they are, who they are. And for once, dig in and find some satisfaction in the assignment. Let it be as though it's your project. Prove you can sink your complete involvement into something far more worthwhile than obsessing over what kind of tragedy you may be responsible for and how to keep yourself from repeating it. These abandoned lions should be all that matter to you. After all, you, if anyone, should understand their condition. In case their inappropriate behavior enlarges to new dimensions, they've been sent to a more desolate place where it won't matter, or no one will notice. Within an oblong area in the south-central part of Wyoming, an area that stops short of including the Medicine Bow National Forest on the east, skirts the edges of the Shoshone and Bridger-Teton National Forests and Flaming Gorge to the west, contains Rawlins but avoids anything else that passes for a metropolitan center. Dirt roads outnumber paved by a wide ratio. Cattle outnumber people by a wider one, and deer and pronghorn might outnumber cattle. In the whole oval, there are only 2, maybe 4 establishments that could be termed ranch recreation or get themselves listed in a bed and breakfast guide. Just west of Rawlins, the wasteland Great Divide Basin surrounded by the Continental Divide takes up about 4,000 square miles in the middle. The rest contains wild, uninhabited hills and mountain ranges, some inaccessible wetlands, uranium and oil mining districts, empty badlands, and, for lack of any other gratifying term, rangeland. It's prairie but not flat, the varicose veins of the Rocky Mountains. Where once the rangeland itself may have been jaggedly dramatic with towering vertical bluffs and deep gorges cut by an ancient flash flood, millions of wet or freezing or dusty storms have melted and softened everything. Then, while the floodplain became hairy with semi-arid shrub, or even dense with cottonwood and willow where the creeks managed to trickle year-round, the former bluffs remain sparsely grassy or nearly bare, sandstone or hard-packed dirt trails. Hard-packed dirt and rocks, eroded still more with every scanty rainfall, etched with foot-wide gullies running downhill. On a level grassy area between 2 of the rounded scrubby bluffs, which reach like fingers but don't come near touching the 4-inch deep creek miles away, coyote, 3 or 4, maybe 5, will gather to fight over, tear apart, gorge themselves on, and display dominance over the carcass of a young pronghorn chained to the ground. Their voices clamoring, the unmistakable chorus of laughing yips will carry sharply a mile in every direction. And if it were midnight or the small hours instead of 7 a.m., might seem a creepy, eerie echo of a war dance, conjuring sensations of glowing campfires behind the hills and beating drums. At very least, cause for a small rancher to lift his ear from his pillow and wonder. But just after dawn, in clear light that's still mostly watery blue, their growls and yelps will simply signal an orgy over a cache of food discovered and won without a struggle. The raised, wailing muzzles will be bloody, likewise chins and chests matted and sticky. Even those individuals who must slink around on the outskirts, heads down, tails tucked, backs arched in the wounded dance of submission, will have blood on their cheeks and whiskers. Their world at this moment will be only as large as the circle of grass flattened around the cache, where they display, advance and retreat, yanking the tortured carcass back and forth on its tether. How many generations since any of their ancestors heard the drumbeat? Not that they would be unaware of other sounds, the snap or rustle of twigs that warn of joiners, or the impatient cry of buzzards and crows. But their caterwaul is as important as the raw, greasy food, so the dim, beating rhythm will mean no more to them than distant thunder, no greater than the harsh rush of wind over rocks and through grass, or the pattering of rain advancing across the rolling prairie as a storm approaches. From some other higher viewpoint, the animals moving back and forth and around the mangled meat will seem distinct and significant despite the wide-angle backdrop of shadowy, endless, unfocused land and huge, colorless, pale sky. But if the scene lasted long enough, it might also appear that the slowly increasing light, which makes the chaparral more specific and tints the sky blue, will seem to push their noise into the distance, and the thudding beat will grow stronger, seem faster. Wind whips the grass, but they won't turn their heads to look behind themselves with the first twinges of alarm until it's eminently obvious this isn't the patter of pronghorn hoofbeats nor the roar of an unseasonable June blizzard. The chopper will rise like an enormous sun from behind the next hill, early rays glinting, then suddenly flaring off the clear bubble, and the crack of shots begins. Had she been screaming since he first started accelerating and skimming close over the hills and bluffs? If so, there hadn't been sentences, maybe not even words, just frenetic static like a radio turned on too loud but not tuned, until you suddenly find a clear station and a female voice that shatters glass. "What the hell are you doing?" The helicopter seemed balanced on the verge of uncontrollable agitation. A canvas strap kept him attached inside the doorless chopper. Unused to shooting in any position but the most stable, but now firing with only his right hand, his left hand still on the collective pitch lever, the main cyclic control stick held between his knees, his feet working the directional pedals, he was unable to maintain a peak level of precision. Take the lever. What? Why are you killing things? It was more shrill than the characteristic shouting always necessary for conversation in a helicopter. Take it. Which one? I don't know how. Just take it, the one between us. Keep it exactly in the same position. I'll take care of following them. Wait! But her hand closed around the grip. Hold it steady. He was then able to momentarily release the main control and use both hands for each shot. Afterwards, his left hand could return to the stick to steady the agitated chopper. Every time he shot, he leaned as far as he could to his right, his head out in the thudding wind. Her voice tore back and forth before it reached him. I don't know what I'm doing. Just keep doing it. He needed to reload, but could barely move his arm. It had somehow gotten wrapped in the harness in his shooting sling. The telescopic sight banged into his chin as the chopper rolled, churned like an unbalanced washing machine, dropped suddenly, then rose. But his eyes stayed cool on the blue steel barrel, his fingers feeling for new shells from the vest. She was beside him, but almost behind him, as he shot to his right out the door. He couldn't see if her mouth was an open grimace, if tears streamed from feral eyes, if ropes were tight in her neck, if her face either blanched or went red, or what happened to the freckles in either case. The coyote seemed to be running in slow motion across the prairie below, suddenly fixed in his imperturbed radar, no matter how the chopper jolted and swayed. He couldn't see the bullets pop through their hides, the little spray of blood at the entry point, the bigger one at the exit. They just crumpled, motionless. 1 down, 6 to go. 2 down, 4 still running. 3 down, 3 getting out of range. 4 down, the last 2 a parallel blur heading into higher brush. Help! She shrieked. You're doing fine. The harness was twisted, pulled tight, like firing in a straitjacket, yet the rifle was fluid in his hands. When his eye went through the sights, the rest of him followed. Everything was working properly, his heart counting the rhythm, his lungs filling slow and low, his muscles loosening to accept the kick of each shot, one hand engaging the bolt, setting again instantly without disturbing the position of the rifle. Each shot came off in sequence, even though the targets were fewer and farther away. Jesus Christ, you're insane! I can't... He cut her off with a final volley of shots. Like an extension of his arm, when you're in the zone, like you can reach out and touch the target gently with one finger. All the body control and precision, the concentration, the calm focus may as well be drugged serenity, a milky warm cocoon, both mind and body, difficult to have to leave it. He tried to turn one way or the other. The damn thing's all twisted. Unhook me, okay? Are you crazy? You'll fall out. Damn it, do what I say. When she unsnapped the harness, the release of pressure was almost a pop. I think I got 5. Both hands back on the control, he took the chopper higher. A major indication? The initial test, just to see if you could stay in the zone with her beside you, ended up testing more than her mere proximity. Scared out of her mind, but you were not moved by her hysterics. Had yourself in hand like a precise oiled pistol, every impassive spring and pin in perfect position, every indifferent crumb of powder accounted for, doing the job, letting her scream. You stayed sharp, stayed focused, stayed unimpassioned, and she's fine. Okay, she's out of her visionary wildlife conservationist mind, spitting mad at you, arms folded, her chin jammed forward, her chisel point eyes aimed dead ahead. Sorry, but in retrospect it was necessary. The horrified, panicked girl, flailing at images of her own violent death, 3 feet away, and you stayed in the zone. What could be a better experiment or a more legitimate result? Proving again that the shooting keeps you sane. Knowing that, now maybe you can become that biologist she reveres so mightily. Doctari, keep the rifle with you. So I've skipped quite a ways, and they're on another one of their trips in the helicopter here. A little before noon, Brian left the airport to pick up bait, steer entrails purchased from a slaughterhouse the taxidermist had suggested several weeks ago, then chained it down in the vicinity of the new state penitentiary south of Rawlins. After that, he returned to his motel room, fed the dog a can of hash from the vending machine, doused his shaggy head in a cold shower, and pushed his legs into new bicycle pants like outfitting with a bulletproof vest before going on duty. He meant to shave, but sagged on the bed for a moment, and suddenly the digital red numbers of the clock were flashing 5:32, and Leah's delicate knuckles were tapping gently on his door. She wore the big headset as she took the chopper out of the airport, left it on even after she'd signed off contract with the control tower. Usually she would exchange that headset for earphones connected to the transmitter, but they had the antennas pulled in and the transmitters off. She'd become proficient with the helicopter and with one-word instructions, south, then west, as he directed her to the bait trap. "Hover," he shouted over the noise, strapping on the harness and lifting his rifle. "Go in at about 200 feet until you see them. It's right over the next mesa in an arroyo." Picking shells from the vest, his hand shook. She was watching. "Did you see what we passed back over there?" He pointed north with the rifle. She shook her head. She didn't look, her eyes still on his hand. He took a deep breath, then suddenly loaded the shells. "The state pen. Maybe they'll hear the chopper and shots. Maybe it'll induce a sweet memory of freedom, or a painful one, of the day freedom ended." Leah didn't answer. She raised her chin and met his eyes. Between the two massive headphones, her freckled face was small and unusually pale, her eyes a lighter, clearer brown, her fingers resting softly on the controls. "Imagine," he said, looking through the sights, holding the rifle too tightly, his fingers white, "what it must be like to be the object of a manhunt and have these things circling above you as spotlights." "What's the matter, Brian?" "Huh?" He had his right knee braced against the rear edge of the open doorway, half his butt still on the seat, right elbow on his thigh, most of his upper body leaning outside under the thudding beat of the propellers, holding the rifle in a rigid, locked aim at nothing. "Okay, go!" But the chopper continued to hover. "Brian," having to rise over the sound of the blades, her voice seemed more of a wail than a shout. "Go!" "No, I don't think you're ready." "I'm set, let's go." Screaming, his words spread out and all but disappeared, not only into the tumultuous whirlwind directly below the chopper, but across the huge, hazy, pre-twilight panorama of empty rangeland stretching out all around as well. "You're obviously upset about something." "Yeah, I'm upset you won't get going before we run out of gas and fall like a meteor." "Brian," again calling over the noise, her voice sounded like the plaintive cry of a night animal. "It's me, isn't it?" "Yes, you're driving me crazy, okay? Now let's go." "Does it really make you this nervous to be developing a friendship?" His left hand like a talon holding the edge of the seat, he lowered the rifle's sights from his eye, but didn't bring himself all the way back into the cockpit. His eyes slits in the buffeting wind. His body flinched at imagining the freedom of diving out the door. "Brian!" Usually, both wearing headsets, concentrating on the thin beep of the transmitter, they couldn't talk. She couldn't screech at him in her wounded bird call voice, making him hear for the first time how his name rhymed with his sister's. As a marksman, you don't just learn to shoot despite the hair raising on the back of your neck. You shoot with precision because of it. On the ground, a ring of dust moved away from the midpoint below the chopper like ripples in a pond, like a crater being formed, like a huge bullseye. "Brian, listen! Because of your sister, you're not letting yourself have any sort of close association with anyone. That relationship is still unresolved, and it's grown enormous and distorted until there's no room for anyone or anything else. Can't you admit, I loved her, but I need love too?" "Shut up!" His shriek spiraled down and away from his mouth. "Not here, not now!" The rifle flailed outside the helicopter as though two people were struggling over it. "If you don't shut out, I'll jump out the door." "Okay, okay, calm down." She took off over the eroded low mesa. In the arroyo, buzzards circled the bait, some sitting on the pebbles in the dry creek bed, lifting their bodies with slow beats of their large wings as the chopper swung into view, rising to circle with the helicopter as though it was a bigger, hungrier rival. Brian fired wildly at the birds while Leia shouted, "Stop it, will you? Please stop!" "They heard us hovering over there, probably heard your damn screaming and took off. How do you even know there were any coyote here in the first place? Put it down. Will you promise to calm down? Will you promise to talk? Put it down, put it down. This noise is making me crazy." A wounded buzzard flapped in circles near the chained guts, was blown 10 or 20 feet further away as the chopper approached and landed in the arroyo. Brian hit the ground almost simultaneously with the helicopter, ran doubled over until he was out from underneath the blades. Easy, easy. Why isn't there any relief? There should be relief, that there won't be a killing today. There were a few coyote prints in damp sand, the burlap bag of guts ripped open and scattered further than the buzzards could have accomplished in a few hours. Probably just one, at most two animals. The low sun stretched long shadows from every bush and skinny tree, rippling over the smooth rocks where just days ago water from the storm had made a river here. The blades of the idling chopper slowed to a lower gear, and Leia came to sit beside him where he was leaning against a boulder that must have divided the current when there was one. "How many got away?" "Not many." He moved away, stood with his back to her, a bloody mess of severed steer hooves and fatty intestine near his feet. When he touched it with his toe, flies and meat-eating wasps rose angrily toward his face. "Maybe we'll see them on our way back." "It doesn't matter." "I'm sorry, Brian. Forget it." "No, really, forget it, okay?" He turned, forcing a smile. "No big deal." He batted at flies, then unloaded the rifle. I still meant what I said," she said softly. The chopper blades beat 5 or 6 times, then he said, "Fine, you don't need to repeat it." "But Brian, things need to be said." "No!" He was grinning, but it felt like the cracked, open mouth of a toothless old man. "You know, this is why guys like their dogs. They don't have to discuss everything. Give her a scratch behind the ear, pat on the butt. She's happy to sit there and be quiet." "It's good to hear you try to be funny," Leia said, still soft and calm. "But I'm not joking, Brian. We need to talk." He licked his lips, rubbed his hands against the stubble on one cheek, turned away. "Or maybe I need your divorce therapy group." "Damn straight," she snapped. Then she sighed. "Okay, I deserved that. But really, sometimes groups make it easier, give you a chance to own up to what you feel, to admit things to yourself. If you could do that, you might be ready to talk to me." "What do you think I'm supposed to be admitting?" He looked at her. Her legs were crossed, an elegant length of lean flesh between her boots and khaki shorts. He closed his eyes but still saw the swimming patch of light that had been her white shirt, open at her throat, with the long, slender neck emerging. "What you're afraid is happening between us." He answered quickly, "Nothing is happening." Again he turned away, looked at the bait. The long shadows had reached and covered it. Suddenly he could smell it, fatty and rancid. The buzzards had returned, flying far overhead. The wounded one was still. "So, okay, maybe you can admit why you've never had a close friend," she paused, "and that you'd like to." "How do you know I haven't?" "Oh, Brian, it's so obvious." She laughed weakly. "Isn't it a relief to have someone notice, acknowledge that they understand, and tell you it's okay, that they understand?" "What are you talking about?" "Just that you don't need to pretend with me anymore." Brian stepped over the bait. His feet kept lifting and going on. 5, 6, 8, 10 steps down the rocky arroyo. Easy, easy. Behind him, the chopper throbbed. Every footfall put the engine, the thud, the wind from the propellers further in the background. The dead buzzard was in front of him now. Sage, rocks, old limbs of trees brought here on a flash flood current. Everything was tinted a firelight crimson. Then, like a final dribble of blood, the sun dipped behind the soft hogbacks far away in the west. His head tipped back, his mouth opened. A long, low wail came from his throat. It didn't stop. Louder, not quite a howl, not a bellow, a sound only a man can make. It spread into the sky, moved out away from him like the ring of dust caused by the chopper blades. Then he stopped, sucking in another breath and holding it. A tiny echo of his cry fell away, and Leah's boots crunched behind him. He moved forward and spun around before she could touch him. "What time is it?" he asked quietly. "I don't know, sunset." She looked into his face. The colors of her eyes were translucent, almost taking the place of the sun, everything else growing drab and flat now that that direct light was gone. "Let's go have dinner, Brian." He looked down at the dead buzzard on the ground between them, nudged it with the end of his rifle. I guess his friends will be out here tomorrow morning to eat him. Did you really kiss her? Did you hold her face with both hands as though stretching her skin as tight as the braid usually does until her eyes fluttered shut as your mouth covered hers? Were her cheeks like the tiny bones of a bird under your thumbs? Her skin like the untouched underside of a newly unfurled leaf? Did she welcome your mouth with a gentle draw of breath, with lips parted and warm, pliant yet firm, wet and eager? And what do you expect to gain by this behavior? Her enduring friendship? Her compassion? Some kind of intimacy or warmth or devoted bond? Remember, those things can't be yours, no matter that some recent weakness in you seems to want them. On the other hand, this definitely goes outside the pattern. What did any of them ever do before their first victim? What do the profiles say these psychos really want? Not a companion, not someone to talk to. What kind of vulnerability is required in the victim? For her to be unconscious, drugged, or asleep? Or hogtied and naked? How long to keep her alive and terrified? How long to keep her aware that the tool which will kill her is already or always in his hand? And those tools, knives, hammers, crowbars, bats, logs, belts, twine, the victim's own stockings, seldom a firearm. Why is that? Probably the cool control needed for shooting, the dispassionate precision. They say snipers are sexually inhibited. There's got to be something available in what you already know that can suggest an essential change in conduct, to spare this girl you may have just kissed, to salvage yourself. Research has to be able to direct a course of action toward progress, or what damn good in it? Otherwise, why not just give it up? Simply leave Wyoming right now. Leah can go home to her support group and trained SEALs. But if you stay, you've got to stop listening to whatever seems to be whispering to you that she may be your only beyond remote, once in a million possibility to ever be close to a woman without hurting her. If she appeared naked and drenched outside your door this minute, would you swathe and rub her with thick towels, wrap her in blankets, ease the wet wisps of hair back from her fluid eyes? Or would your breath be the only warmth you'd offer, your hot mouth closing over her? Please don't do this. But it's much too late to beg. Maybe the storm blew the roof off her motel while she was in the shower. What an idiotic premise to get her here, as unprotected as possible, wet, nude, and of course terrified. And naturally, she comes directly to you. Please don't. Don't touch her. Send her back out into the deluge. Let her pale skin be stung by the hail. Let her crumple and sob, bite her knuckles, watch from inside, from the window, from the binoculars, through the sights, but please don't touch her. When the sun returns tomorrow to raise steam from the sodden foothills and plains, maybe you'll find her out on that unprotected bluff with the lioness, crouched at opposite ends, hungry and disoriented, each waiting for you to come get her. Daktari. Thank you.